One tiny light changed nuclear power forever. March 28, 1979. 3 Mile Island, Pennsylvania. A reactor running at near full capacity when a maintenance hiccup in the cooling system triggered what should have been a routine shutdown. Except one valve stayed open when everyone thought it was closed, and by the time anyone figured that out, 32,000 gallons of radioactive coolant had already escaped and the core was melting. You're going to see exactly how a single indicator light lied to trained operators for hours, why similar valve failures at other plants never triggered industry warnings, and how this one event cost $1 billion and stopped US nuclear construction dead for decades. Plus, the actual radiation release was so small that your average exposure was less than a chest x-ray, yet 140,000 people evacuated anyway. That contradiction alone tells you everything about what really went wrong. Let's start with the obvious mechanical failure and slowly work our way toward the most terrifying human factors that amplified it into near catastrophe. Number 10, the condensate polisher blockage. 4 in the morning, Unit 2 is humming along at 97% power, then one of 8 condensate polishers in the secondary cooling loop gets clogged with resin buildup, a minor issue. Operators decide to use compressed air to clear it, textbook move, except the Air Force's water passed a stuck open check valve into an instrument airline. That triggers automatic shutdowns of feed water pumps, condensate booster pumps, and the main turbine. The reactor scrambles, shuts itself down, but here's the thing, even after a scram, the core still generates about 6% of full power from residual decay heat. That heat has to go somewhere or things get ugly fast. Number 9, the relief valve sticks open. Pressure in the primary coolant system spikes as the turbine stops pulling heat. Right on cue, the pilot-operated relief valve on top of the pressurizer opens at 2,155 psi to vent excess steam into the reactor coolant drain tank. Pressure drops below the reset point of 2,155 psi. The valve should close. It doesn't. Mechanical failure. The valve had already failed 11 times across similar Babcock and Wilcox reactors, 9 of those failures leaving it stuck open just like this, but no one issued a comprehensive industry warning. No retrofit, no alarm saying, hey, this valve loves to jam. So it stayed open, quietly dumping coolant, and nobody in the control room had a clue because of what came next. Number 8, the indicator light that lied. In the control room, there's a light labeled light on -RC -RV2 open. Sounds clear, right? Except it wasn't. That light only told operators whether electrical power was being sent to the solenoid valve that closes the pour V. It said nothing about the valve's actual mechanical position. When the close signal was sent, the light went out. Operators looked at a dark light and assumed the valve had sealed shut. In reality, it remained wide open, bleeding coolant at a rate that would expose the reactor core in hours. This wasn't an edge case. The control room violated basic human engineering principles. The light was ambiguously labeled, it was positioned poorly. The color coding used red for 14 different meanings. Over 750 alarms existed without prioritization. The NRC's own human factors evaluation later found 80 to 96% non-compliance with display criteria on key panels. Parallax issues on 115 indicators. 26% of displays inaccessible to shorter operators. This wasn't operator error, this was design-induced disaster waiting to happen. Number 7. Emergency feed water valves left closed. Compounding everything, 2 block valves in the emergency feed water lines, EF12A and EF12B, were closed. They'd been left that way after a surveillance test 2 days earlier, in direct violation of NRC regulations requiring them to be open during operation. One valve status light was obscured by a yellow maintenance tag. The other may have been blocked by an operator's body or simply overlooked in the chaos. Without feed water flow to the steam generators, heat transfer failed. Reactor coolant system temperature and pressure fluctuated erratically. The pressurizer level rose because of steam voids forming in the reactor coolant, while overall system pressure fell. This created a contradictory signal that confused operators who'd been trained to avoid a pressurizer solid scenario, where rising water level in the pressurizer could lead to overpressurization. They were staring at symptoms that didn't match any scenario they'd practiced. Number 6. The containment sump overflows and alarms are ignored. By 4:11 in the morning, the containment building sump has filled and overflowed, triggering alarms. These were dismissed as unrelated to a major leak because the operators still believed the pour V was closed. At 4:15, the pressurizer relief tank ruptures. Radioactive coolant starts leaking into the containment building. The operators, fearing overpressurization based on the misleading pressurizer level gauge, manually throttle back the high-pressure injection pumps. Then, at 520, they shut off the reactor coolant pumps entirely because the pumps began cavitating from low coolant levels. This decision halted natural circulation. A steam bubble formed in the reactor vessel head. By 6 in the morning, the top of the core was exposed. Zirconium cladding on the fuel rods reacted with steam, producing hydrogen gas and additional heat. The cladding melted, uranium dioxide pellets were damaged, radioactive isotopes released internally. At 2 in the afternoon, a small hydrogen explosion occurred inside the containment, spiking pressure by 28 psi without breaching the structure. Containment held, but the core had partially melted. Number 5. The secondary indicator hidden behind a panel. A shift change at 6 in the morning brought fresh eyes. By 6:45, radiation alarms were screaming. Coolant radiation hit 300 times normal. Containment doses reached 800 rem per hour. A site area emergency was declared at 6:56. By 7:26, it escalated to a general emergency. And then, finally, someone noticed elevated temperatures in the PORV tailpipe. A secondary indicator, not safety grade, hidden behind a 7-foot panel, not prioritized in any procedure. That's when they realized the valve had been open the entire time. They closed a block valve upstream. The leak stopped. But by then, 32,000 gallons of coolant had escaped, and the core had partially melted. Hours of delay because of one ambiguous light, and a culture that didn't design around the reality that humans make mistakes under pressure. Number 4. Inadequate training for the actual scenario. Operator training focused heavily on simulator time for pressurizer control and avoiding solid conditions. Only about 5% of training time covered loss of coolant accidents or diagnostic skills for saturation conditions. There was no scenario practice for natural circulation cooling during a LOCA. Emergency guidelines emphasized pressurizer control over core cooling. So when operators faced contradictory readings, rising pressurizer level versus falling system pressure, they made the call their training had primed them for. They throttled injection. They protected the pressurizer. They followed procedures written with an incomplete mental model of how this reactor could fail. The Kameny Commission later stated that fundamental changes were necessary not just in procedures, but in the attitudes of the industry and regulators. It differentiated human error from design-induced mistakes, noting operators' actions were inappropriate but rooted in systemic failures. Research consistently shows 90% of industrial accidents involve human error amplified by poor interfaces. Number 3, the daisy chain of equipment that already had a track record. The PORV that stuck open, similar event at Davis-Besse in 1977. Valve stayed open, warnings were issued but not acted on industry-wide. The condensate polisher issue that started the whole sequence, routine maintenance gone slightly wrong. The closed emergency feed water valves, procedural gap that should never have existed. The confusing control room, over 750 alarms without prioritization. Ambiguous labeling, red used for 14 different meanings. No direct position sensor for the PORV. All of this was known. The NRC had data, other plants had experienced pieces of this puzzle, but the system didn't connect the dots until 3 Mile Island forced it to. Number 2, the radiation release that was tiny but terrifying. The accident released about 480 petabecquerels of noble gases, mainly xenon, and 481 to 629 gigabecquerels of iodine-131 into the environment. Average public exposure across 2 million people was 1.4 millirem. That's a fraction of annual background radiation, which averages 310 millirem, comparable to a single chest X-ray. No immediate health effects were detected. Some epidemiological studies, including one from Columbia University, reported slight elevations in cancer rates nearby, particularly lung cancer, but other reviews, including those by the NRC and EPA, found no causal link, attributing variations to factors like radon levels or demographics. Long-term studies in 1990 found no excess cancers. A 2008 analysis suggested minor thyroid impacts from iodine-131. The science is debated, but the consensus leans toward minimal direct health impact. Yet 140,000 people within 20 miles evacuated. Pregnant women and children were prioritized. Most returned within weeks. The fear was enormous. The actual dose was not. Number 1. The attitude problem that made it all inevitable. The Kameny report didn't mince words. It stated the problem wasn't just technical, but rooted in complacency and poor communication across the industry and regulators. Operators made decisions in a control room designed to overload them. The NRC noted labeling issues that added 800 operator changes to the panels, annunciator flaws, over 750 lights without priority, training that emphasized the wrong failure mode, procedures that didn't account for this combination of failures. But at the core, it was an attitude problem, a belief that the system was safe enough, that humans would catch the mistakes, that design reviews didn't need to imagine every possible misinterpretation. The accident demonstrated that nuclear safety hinges on holistic integration, from valve reliability to intuitive interfaces. One Khamenei Commission member reflected that it wasn't just a technical failure, but an attitude problem in a high-stakes field. Complacency kills, hands down. If you want to see how operator overrides and design flaws combined in an even deadlier scenario, check out what happened at Chernobyl next,